The Oil and Gas Industry of Canada and Its History by David DuBose and William Myers.
Canada has a deep-rooted history in oil and gas industry. Early Canadian natives left evidence of oil making its way to the surface in western Canada. Oil use in North America began as fuel for lighting, which was then used for lamps in homes and cities. The first real oil company was started around 1850 by Charles N. Tripp of Ontario. He started the International Mining and Manufacturing Company and built the first asphalt production plant. He sold the company to James Miller Williams. Williams sold the oil as lamp fuel and became known as the Canadian oil industry's founding father.
The quality of oil in Ontario was not as high as the oil of Pennsylvania origin. The Canadian oil had high sulfur content, which gave off a foul smell when burned. The Canadian sour crudes needed to be refined in order to compete with the higher quality oils found elsewhere. Eventually, a solution for cleaning sour crudes was discovered by Herman Frasch. He used copper oxide to separate the sulfur from the hydrocarbons. His method was instilled to clean Ontario's sulfuric crude.
The process of refining begins as the crude is heated to hot temperatures and the most desired hydrocarbons like kerosene and gasoline are vaporized. Then the vapor is cooled and captured, while the excess is either used as lubricant or is burned off. Kerosene was typically the most commonly sought after fuel for lighting in lamps.
Competition with the American oil trusts such as Rockefeller Standard Oil became tough for the small, independent producers and refiners of Ontario. 16 of these Ontario companies conjoined in 1880, forming the Imperial Oil Company. These companies later moved to Sarnia, Ontario, on the shore of Lake Huron, was Imperial's new headquarters. The lake allowed for direct access to the U.S. and allowed for more reliable trade into the U.S. Trade with the U.S. was a major economical ally and critical to Canada's economy. This was in part because of its declining demand for oil that Canada's economy was experiencing at the time. Rockefeller took control of Imperial Oil right after the 20th century. After Standard Oil was forced to break its monopoly, Imperial Oil continued to have great success in Canada. It experienced more competition after the Standard Oil was broken up.
Gradually, the demand for oil was down. About that time, gasoline engines were developed. Only a few years after the turn of the 20th century, it became clear that gasoline-fueled engines were much more efficient than previous machinery. From that time on, the hydrocarbon-fueled engine took off, being implemented in automobiles, boats, and much more technology.
World War I called for a wide availability of oil. The most technologically advanced companies also had unlimited demand. Around the same time, sales of automobiles were going through the roof. The high amounts of oil produced in the U.S. and Canada helped the Allied forces since they didn't run into oil shortages.
After the discovery of crude-fueled machinery, despite the Great Depression, the oil industry just kept growing larger and larger with more companies joining the industry. The Great Depression led to a decrease in Canada's oil imports due to their main importer, the U.S., having financial issues and their economy being in turmoil. The North American reliance in oil began because of the use of oil for all types of power. Canada was using more oil than they could produce, causing them to explore for more oil fields.
Oil would play even a bigger role in World War II than the First. High-octane aviation fuel was needed for aerial warfare. Since the U.S. and Great Britain were leaders in oil production, they had an advantage over opposing forces. Although the shortage of oil was good for the Allied forces, Canada faced many problems. Once Canada realized the effects of relying on non-domestic oil, they began more advanced research and to improve domestic production. Just before the Second World War, the first plastic products were coming out following the invention of nylon, and Canada took over the production.
Few years after the end of the war, Imperial Oil started major seismic research in Alberta. Before, Imperial Oil had drilled over 100 wells that never produced and cost them a lot. About the same time, they were in dire need for new resources. They found those in a big way, in a large Devonian Reef formation. The huge oil-bearing formation was located near Leduc, Alberta. The Leduc well added credibility to the importance of seismic surveys, as well as created tons of job opportunities close to home. The Leduc well discovery was a pivotal point in Canada's oil history and their industry. Before Leduc, Canada was still relying on importing fuel and few other energy sources, but was never reliant on exporting oil and other sources.
After the success from the Leduc well, other major oil companies began funding and gaining confidence to conduct a wide exploration for more oil. As a result of many years of greater success in the production of oil, Canada became much less dependent on importation of oil. Not only was the production of crude going well, but also there were many pipelines being built to help the transportation and marketing of petroleum products. In the late 60s, primitive computers made their way into the industry, and the technological age of the industry began. In the 1970s, sales of natural gas rocketed as people found different ways to convert engines and allow them to run off natural gas. The advancement of seismic surveys has allowed for more intensive exploration in very remote areas of Canada.
Canada has had a rich history with the U.S. regarding their oil-related exchanges. The trade relationship between the U.S. and Canada has been very healthy. Canada is almost exclusively trading with the U.S. in the oil and gas industry. This provides for safe and efficient exchange. The trade benefits both countries and helps North America to be independent from more troubled regions in the world where trade is not so easy. As Canada has found its niche in the relationship, the country has not been so reliant on the United States for oil. This will be a big plus in the future and would help construct a stable economy. Pipelines to and from the United States have been used for years and are still being built. Although the U.S. has incredibly successful domestic production, oil coming in from Canada hasn't slowed. Canada has actually been exporting more crude via pipeline into the U.S. in recent years. Canada is actually the only country from which crude oils are being exported to the U.S. at the moment.
From the beginning, when Charles N. Triple Woodstock founded the first Canadian petroleum company and registered oil company in North America, International Mining and Manufacturing Company is known for being one of North America's first finders of oil and giant in oil production. Imperial Oil became a major producer in the mid-1900s after discovering oil at Turner Valley, Alta in 1914 and Norman Wells in 1920. Also on February 13, 1947 at Leduca, Alta. In the early 1970s, the multinational companies of Exxon, Royal Dutch, Shell, British Petroleum, Mobil, Texaco, and Gulf and Standard Oil of California had controlled more than half of Canadian oil companies' assets, revenues, and sales. When World War II began, the government created a crown company called Wartime Oils and worked with the United States to construct a pipeline that ran from Norman Wells to California. Petro-Canada is the only one of these provincial companies to be successful. Petro-Canada grew mainly by buying assets from Atlantic Richfield, Pacific Petroleum, Petrofina, BP Canada, and Gulf Canada. In 1997, Petro-Canada grew to become one of the three biggest integrated oil companies and had around 5,800 employees, $8 billion in assets, and $6 billion in revenues. In the late 1970s, Canadian companies like Dome Petroleum, Nova, and Supetro became successful in the industry, mainly because of the Foreign Investment Review Act, which the government made companies forced to sell many of their assets, causing them to merge with larger companies. Suncor, Syncrude, Canadian Natural Resources Limited, Imperial Oil, Encana, and Husky Energy are the biggest companies that control Canada's upstream and downstream oil and natural gas ventures. Enbridge and TransCanada are companies that control Canada's midstream pipeline. Companies all over the world, because Canada go to Canada because it still has a lot of untouched oil reserves.
Canada is home to many of the largest oil fields in North America and is ranked fifth in the world in oil production. The three main sources of oil are vast oil sands, the Western Canada Sedimentary Basin, and offshore oil fields. Alberta is one of Canada's largest provinces and is home to roughly 97% of Canada's oil sands reserves. One of Canada's largest oil sands fields is in Athabasca in northeastern Alberta. Two technologically advanced drilling methods that Canadian companies use to extract oil from the oil sands are open pit mining, also known as surface mining, or in situ drilling, also known as subsurface drilling. Another one of Canada's sources for oil production is the Western Canada Sedimentary Basin. In the Western Canada Sedimentary Basin, there is a 1.4 million square kilometer field in Western Canada. The basin is one of the world's biggest petroleum and natural gas reserves and a major supplier for North America's petroleum and natural gas markets. Offshore drilling in the Atlantic Ocean is another source of production in Canada. Most of Canada's offshore crude oil production is in the Jean d'Arc Basin off the east shore of Newfoundland and Labrador, and the ExxonMobil operated Hibernia oil field in the North Atlantic Ocean.
The oil and gas sector contributes significantly to Canada's economy, and it's crucial to Canada's economy's wealth and prosperity. The oil, gas, and mining operating sectors account for more than 1/4 of the total of Canada's GDP, or gross domestic product. Canada's oil and gas company play a huge role in the economy through its investments in the Toronto Stock Exchange. In 2012, the industry made $62 billion in capital investments focused on innovation and growth. However independent Canada may seem, it has always made a global impact on the global oil and natural gas industry due to the fact that Canada has been a fixture in the world's top oil producers.